The Halo thing matters? No, it doesn't. All right. Key Sudan city falls to paramilitary group. What does this mean for the war? Updates from Sudan.
Allahu Akbar. The symbolic Sudanese city of al-Fashir has fallen to paramilitary forces after weeks of intense battles and a brutal 18-month siege. Aid workers and advocates have warned of the humanitarian catastrophe that will unfold if al-Fashir falls to the rapid support forces. So what does their takeover mean for the people of Darfur and the state of the war in Sudan? Around 3,000 people fled al-Fashir on foot as the RSF captured the army garrison in the heart of the city. Some were scattered across fields monitored by RSF drones, and others left in queues, trailed by RSF trucks. Women have been leaving the city in droves for months. Many of them told us in camps in North Darfur that their brothers, sons, and husbands were trapped in the city, along with around 260,000 people, forcefully starved and bombarded by the RSF in their long-time effort to capture al-Fashir and cement their control of Darfur, annexing a region the size of France with lucrative gold mines. Thousands of civilians are trapped and face extrajudicial killings and arrests in mass graves. This man in the white scarf has been seen in other instances wearing RSF fatigues. Videos also show the RSF rounding up men of fighting age and accusing them of being a part of the army. The Sudan Doctors Network has said dozens of civilians have been killed in ethnically motivated attacks in the hours after the RSF captured the garrison, in a total telecommunications blackout. Insiders told Sky News that high-level negotiations are underway to secure the safe passage of civilians. But al-Fashir's fall follows the same formula of other RSF takeovers of cities in Darfur: a comms blackout, and then brutal, ethnically motivated attacks on civilians and assassinations of state-aligned commanders. And now, the targeting of civilian journalists like Muammar Ibrahim. Forced to kneel and announce the RSF takeover of al-Fashir after reporting on their siege of his hometown for many months. The RSF, born out of the tribal militias that terrorized Darfur in the early 2000s, have been accused of committing genocide in the region 20 years on. Backed by the United Arab Emirates and taking on the military state that first armed them with more sophisticated weapons than ever before.
The Rapid Support Forces are a funded paramilitary group by the United Arab Emirates. They're the ones who've been wreaking havoc all over Sudan, and partially because it's a conflict in Africa, and partially because it's not completely directly involved by any Western nations. I mean, there's always Western involvement, but like nothing as direct as like America with Israel, for example. It doesn't get a lot of coverage.
Let's talk about
this is the Al Jazeera report on the Sudanese civil war as a starter.
What's happening in Sudan, because people are talking about the risk of genocide here in Darfur, in the city of El Fasher.
It's also being masqueraded as like ethnic tensions, even though there is ethnic violence. The major reason for the genocidal ethnic cleansing campaign is specifically for territorial acquisition and, of course, extraction of national resources. And I mean, they even mentioned it with like gold and other things like that.
It's a very dire situation. There is fighting in all directions. Most of the attacks are happening on civilians' facilities, particularly civilians' homes.
We're past warning. For the people on the ground in El Fasher, they don't need press releases. They need protection.
A civil war broke out in Sudan just over a year ago, and there's fighting across large parts of the country. The capital, Khartoum, is barely functioning.
What we're looking at only a year on is near total state collapse.
Sudan is the world's largest humanitarian crisis.
The world has abandoned Sudan.
So what's actually happening in Darfur, and what's being done to stop the fighting? First, a quick reminder of the backstory. Sudan was ruled by one man, Omar al-Bashir, for 30 years. He was brought down in 2019 in part because of pressure from huge protests. Then there was a short period when Sudan looked like it was on a path to democracy. And among a lot of people, there was a sense of hope. But that democratic transition got derailed pretty quickly. In 2021, there was a military coup, and then, last year, war broke out. It started out as a personal rivalry between these two generals, General Burhan, who leads Sudan's national army, that's the Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, and General Hemeti, who leads a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. And basically, you've ended up with SAF and the RSF in a bitter fight to control Sudan. There are many other armed groups in the mix, but SAF basically controls parts of the east and north, and the RSF has most of the west, and most of the capital, Khartoum.
Khartoum is obviously a symbolic territory, and so we will continue to see both SAF and the RSF fight over that territory, even as they win and lose other territories around the country.
Sudan, as we know it, has died. And it is now a series of regional conflicts with regional forces defending regional interests.
And that brings us to what's happening in Darfur, which is a huge region, roughly the size of Spain. It's divided into 5 states, and the RSF already has control of 4 of them. Now the battle is on for the last one, North Darfur, and its capital El Fasher, where SAF have a military base and are trying to hold on to the city. For most of last year, there were various truces in El Fasher, where local armed groups agreed not to take sides and acted like a buffer between RSF and SAF. But the latest truce appeared to collapse in April, and several groups aligned themselves with SAF to fight against the RSF.
And that puts El Fasher very much back in the crosshairs of RSF. What RSF is doing in El Fasher right now is that they are essentially trying to strangulate the city. They've even tried cutting off water to the city. That's how brutal this is getting.
There's a strategic sort of logic of at the RSF leadership level, which is to take El Fasher and therefore have control over all 5 states of Darfur and all 3 border points with Libya, with Chad, with the Central African Republic.
If you don't control El Fasher, you don't control Darfur. And RSF knows that.
But if the RSF take control of El Fasher, there are huge fears about what it means for the estimated 1.8 million people living there, especially because there's an ethnic dimension to this war, where you have, very broadly, Arab militias aligned with the RSF targeting what are commonly referred to as non-Arab groups. And to understand that, we have to go back to the 2000s. In 2003, there was an uprising in Darfur against the government of Omar al-Bashir. The rebel groups were mostly from non-Arab communities like the Zagawa, Masalit, and Fur, who felt neglected by the Arab-dominated government. Bashir responded by arming local Arab militias known as the Janjaweed to fight against the rebels.
They killed, raped, burned, massively displaced up to 1/3 of the population of Darfur as a whole.
Violence is worsening. The bombing, murder, and rape of innocent civilians.
Genocide there has already claimed 400,000 lives.
Remains of Darfur's dead, brought to the surface by strong desert winds.
Later, the Janjaweed evolved and rebranded as the Rapid Support Forces. And in 2017, Bashir's government made the RSF an official paramilitary unit, a kind of second army. But the RSF kept their strong links with Darfur and the Arab militias there.
The RSF is a monster that the Sudanese army and the Sudanese regime created, and now it's turned on the Sudanese state.
They have become regularized, they have uniforms, but effectively these are the same types of people, same groups of people with the same political objectives.
The RSF has been so emboldened and so empowered to commit such atrocities for over 20 years. It happened before and they got away with it.
So what's happening in Darfur now is basically an old conflict that's being reignited. There's mounting evidence that the RSF and its allies are using similar tactics as before. These pictures show RSF forces rounding up people from the Masalit ethnic group in a place called Ardamata in West Darfur late last year. It's a suburb of the city of El Geneina. And a recent UN report described how the RSF have been targeting the Masalit community, and that between 10 and 15,000 people were killed in El Geneina. An independent investigation says it's found clear evidence that massacres against the Masalit amount to genocide. In the last couple of months, the fighting has moved to El Fasher. A team of researchers at Yale University have been monitoring the area using satellite imagery.
We believe that they burned, just in the past 2 months, well over 40 villages in and around El Fasher, primarily Zagawa communities. And so the tempo of destruction, of intentional targeting of communities by RSF in Darfur has sped up.
And that's why people are increasingly worried about what could happen if the RSF take over the whole of El Fasher. It's a city where hundreds of thousands of people fled to escape recent RSF attacks in other parts of Darfur and the conflict back in the 2000s.
Al Fasher has become a sanctuary city, and this is what really has inflated its population in recent months.
If El Fasher falls, then there will be nothing that prevents rapid support forces from then identifying every single community left standing that they missed.
And it's not just fear of more killings.
And yeah, El Fasher has now been captured by the RSF. RSF seized El Fasher after a 500-day siege, trapping over 260,000 civilians. Hospitals were looted as reports emerged of executions of ethnic cleansing. The UAE-backed RSF has begun mass killings amid total security collapse. Seizing the 6th Infantry Division headquarters, the Sudan Doctors Network reports RSF militias have begun executing civilians and committing ethnic cleansing. 115 killed, 102 injured, casualties, several hospitals looted and disabled. Ongoing since May 2024, the siege. RSF begins the siege on the city in May 2024. Supply lines are cut off, and the SAF control shrinks to a 13-kilometer square radius. By August 2025, October 10th, 2025, RSF seizes headquarters. SDN reports executions and hospital looting. October 26, 2025, drone strike crippled power generation. October 27, 2025, RSF declares full control. Humanitarian access collapses. Operational picture, how it happened. Encirclement and air/artillery strikes, aid blockade, extrajudicial executions. The aid blockade and the encirclement was something that I've covered as well, something that people were talking about. The IDP camps, ethnic neighborhoods, and medical facilities, systematic looting and house demolition, mass executions of terror tactics, some of which you can see exactly in the same way that like Israel has operated, exactly how Israel does it. El Fasher is now occupied, and a risk of large-scale ethnic cleansing is sharply increased. These are, of course, this militia, the Rapid Support Forces militia, is backed by the United Arab Emirates. And they announced that they would kill civilians attempting to flee the siege, while field reports confirmed the hospitals were looted amid the security collapse. They get logistical training, or they get logistical aid, and they do joint training, and they get arms. They've even actually, according to reports, they've even actually utilized Israeli artillery as well. The possession of advanced weaponry heightens concerns about its potential for future acts of violence. Video footage has emerged of Israeli-made LAR-160 light artillery rockets being used by the Rapid Support Forces in Sudan against the Sudanese army. The RSF is a paramilitary force that is at war with the Sudanese government. 160 millimeter caliber multiple rocket launcher that can fire up to 26 rockets at a time. It has a range of up to 45 kilometers, can be used to attack a variety of targets, including infantry, armor, and artillery. The launcher seen in the RSF footage was mounted in a light truck. Sudan is not known to operate the type, hence it's likely that the RSF acquired the artillery from a different source. What does the UAE gain from this? What do you mean? Massive foothold for mineral extraction, gold mines, things of that nature. Why did Africa get colonized throughout time? Why did it get colonized? In the words of Parenti, you don't steal from a poor person. You steal from someone who has something to steal. Africa has plenty of resources to steal. A tremendous amount of resources, as a matter of fact. That's why they do it. That's why it has been purposely kept behind, purposely destabilized, so that people can extract these natural resources for pennies on the dollar with a cheap labor force and with tremendous instability. People can't demand more in the process of extraction. The RSF, Good Vibe Politics says, the RSF would not be able to support itself without the support it gets from the UAE, which is functionally a U.S. client state. It is no surprise that the same actors supporting Israeli genocide in Palestine are supporting the same violence in Sudan. It is deeply connected. Siham Hassan, a former member of Sudan's parliament who ran community kitchens feed the hungry and starving in her home city of El Fasher, was executed by the RSF militiamen earlier today.
People in El Fasher are already starving. Right now, Sudan is facing one of the world's biggest hunger crises. Almost half the population don't have enough to eat. Around 5 million people are teetering on the brink of starvation. In one refugee camp south of El Fasher, a child is dying every 2 hours because of malnutrition, according to Doctors Without Borders.
أبي في ستة كلهم ظروفهم كعب ما عندهم قرش قال ياكل هل ناكل ونشرب.
والله هي صعب بصراحه يعني انا ناسه لها دولة حتى الان دوله ديتي شايفه لحتى الان ما قدرت عشان يجيبوا لنا حاجه نسوي لها عيال نعشين بوزات.
My team are telling me in Darfur what they see is that people are eating leaves, they're eating soil, they're eating one meal a day if they're lucky.
And aid is just not getting to people who need it, especially in Darfur. International aid agencies are struggling to get.
Yeah, also the UAE doesn't have enough competency in its ranks either. So in order to train the RSF militias, they also rely on Colombian mercenaries as well. Like, remember what I told you guys about like these Gulf states and how the Gulf states, like the actual nationals they have too much money individually because like their actual population is very small. It's mostly just like immigrant workers, right? Some literally devoid of passports. The actual citizens, the number of citizens is much smaller. And they also have a fuck ton of money because of all the natural resources they have, specifically oil money. And that's the reason why they're like, why the fuck would I go and die in Sudan? So they hire Colombian mercenaries that have in the past been trained by the United States government. And they get those guys to go and train the rapid support forces at the behest of the UAE.
To these conflict areas, and both the RSF and SAF have been accused of blocking or stealing aid as a war tactic.
The reason why people are surviving is because we have local volunteers, Sudanese, who are on the ground, on the front line, risking their lives to save their peers.
There's also a funding problem. The UN says it needs $2.7 billion for its aid operations in Sudan this year, and that it's only received 17% of that. Now, something else to keep in mind is that this war is also being fueled because the RSF and SAF are getting support from other countries. The UAE is accused of supplying weapons to the RSF, allegations that a panel of UN experts described as credible based on their own investigations. The UAE denies supplying weapons, calling the accusations propaganda, and says it's transporting aid to Sudan. And then you've got Russia, which appears to be backing both sides. A mercenary group linked to the Russian government is said to be supplying the RSF with weapons, while Russia is also supporting SAF as a way, it seems, to secure access to Sudan's Red Sea coast, where SAF is in control. SAF also has Egypt on its side. General Burhan has made visits to Cairo. There are also reports that SAF has been using Iranian drones.
If supplies to these two sides slow down, I think we would see this war start to die down quite a bit as well. So outside powers and backers of these two sides are clearly helping prolong the war.
At the same time, there have been some diplomatic efforts to try to stop the fighting. For example, Egypt and the UAE reportedly brought the two sides together for talks in Bahrain earlier this year. And the UN Security Council has adopted a resolution calling for the RSF to stop its attack on Al Fasher, for both sides to agree to a ceasefire and to allow aid in.
Yeah, the UAE lost almost an entire unit of all UAE nationals when they invaded Yemen, and there was massive public backlash. It was like 35 people in one day. After that, they only used mercenaries. Yeah, and their like annual household income is far higher than like the average American, even. Oil-rich nation. So like one person in the UAE dying from their own analysis is like, it's like 35 millionaires dying in one day. Do you understand? Maybe not that much, but close to it.
We've actually seen more of a aligning of interests among the outside actors to actually want to get some end to this war. Basically, no one really seems to benefit from Sudan collapsing. But the problem is that the two warring sides want to keep fighting.
And remember, it's not really just two sides because of all the other groups involved, especially in Darfur. And that makes finding any kind of resolution even harder. Whether there's enough global political will to even push for that is a whole other question.
The spillover from the Sudan war is tremendous. It affects the whole region. It could easily affect the whole continent of Africa. And nothing is being done.
We are consistently raising the issue of Sudan to top diplomats around the world, and many times they make clear to us it's just not high on their agenda. Now that we might see 1 million Sudanese starve to death, I expect we'll see some uptick in efforts to try to save the Sudanese people. I hope it's not all too little too late, but obviously most of it is too little too late, and everyone was warned.
Our show
is crazy because like the less the annual income is of the average person, the less important they are in the eyes of the world. Like you could kill 1 million Sudanese people, but as long as like the UAE gets to secure gold mines in the territory, most of the world doesn't even turn around and recognize it. It's entirely fucked up. And yet, once again, as I've said, it's not that these nations are poor. They're not. They're very resource rich. It's just the people have been purposely kept poor. Anyway, we'll watch this Cogito video on Sudan is collapsing. But this is from a year ago.
We're getting access to.
I don't want to watch a older video. How gold is smuggled out of Africa and processed in Dubai at the 7-minute mark.
It is also exported to Switzerland, to the UAE, and from the you want to avoid having gold from the DRC linked to conflict, or I don't know, in Sudan or for Mali or for Zimbabwe. The majority of this illegal gold is exported to the UAE, and from the UAE, a large part of it is also exported to Switzerland, and then from Switzerland, we know that a huge part of gold is also exported to the US. But when it's imported in the US, the majority of the importer will just say, oh, it gold from Switzerland, refined in Switzerland. The origin of this gold would just be Switzerland. But this gold, which is sometimes presented as recycled gold, can be gold which was 2 weeks before in a mine controlled by a jihadist group, by a Wagner group, or by other criminals.
Gold exports from Ghana more than doubled between 2012 and 2022, from 243 metric tons to 609 metric tons. The UAE, Switzerland, and India were the top recipients of African gold during that same time period, accounting for 80% of the continent's exports. Historically, about 212,000 metric tons have been mined worldwide, including about 2/3 extracted since 1950.
You arrive at Dubai International Airport. You are carrying a bag full of gold. I mean full. Gold bars, jewelry, chunks of raw, unrefined gold, full. Everyone from your flight walks towards passport control, but you wheel your carry-on bag the other way, towards the transit terminal. You sit down at a cafe, and a short while later, another traveler appears. He puts his bag down, picks yours up, and walks the other way. You finish your coffee, pick up his bag, and board the next flight back to Here's a graph that tells the story. It shows the price of gold over the last 50 years. What do you notice? Put simply, there's so much anxiety right now around the world and around the future of the global economy. The power of the petrodollar is waning, with the Middle East increasingly unstable, and more countries are looking to abandon the US currency altogether. In particular, I'm talking about China, India, and Russia. And so central banks around the world are reacting, and they've started looking for an independent currency that can secure their monetary reserves. Hence, we want the gold, sucker! But there's one problem. Gold is not like the US dollar or even Bitcoin. It's real, and it's heavy. That means it has to be physically moved from one place to another. If you want to buy gold, you have to go to where it's being sold. That's where Dubai comes in. It's had a gold souk since the early...
By the way, the easiest way to cut this out in its entirety is if, instead of directly sanctioning the RSF, as they have done so already, they just directly sanction the UAE. Obviously, it's never going to happen, but this gold for weapons scheme that they've designed could be cut short if America stopped, one, giving weapons to the UAE, or at the very least abided by the pre-existing contracts that they have, like the Leahy Law, that declares weapons that find themselves in the hands of like known terrorist organizations or organizations that are engaging in war crimes are in at odds with U.S. law, existing U.S. law, and therefore they shouldn't be able to do that. There's also Chinese weapons as well. There's Israeli weapons as well. But once again, like, it's not all coming from China. And America has a lot of power here. The problem, of course, is that America doesn't give a shit. America doesn't give a shit about Sudan. And America doesn't give a shit that the UAE is doing it. I don't know if they're directly getting a cut out of it, but I'm sure it plays a role in it as well.
1900s, but when the country had its oil boom in the 1970s, it started attracting people from all around the world. It built its airport, became a playground for the rich and famous, and its gold market grew and grew. With a 0% tariff on bringing gold into the country, it quickly became the ideal place to import, refine, and sell. Today, the so-called City of Gold is home to more than 20 gold refiners and 7,000 gold traders. It imports more than 1,000 tons of gold each year, and 2/3 of that comes from Africa. But here is where the problem begins.
Most of the important airports in Africa have regular flights to Dubai, so it's also very convenient for traders to go there. And when they get there, they have very easy access to companies that are willing to buy the gold they're carrying. A good part of this gold is carried with hand luggage, and once again, it's not being checked upon import. And thanks to corruption and other mechanisms, it's also sometimes not, very often actually not checked upon export in the African countries. So they can get away with controls at the borders. It works quite effectively.
Yuval Schultz worked on a report earlier this year that looked at the gold transferred between Africa and the UAE. This is how much gold African countries are saying they're exporting to the UAE. But this is how much gold the UAE says it imported from African countries in 2022. There is more than 400 tons of gold missing there. According to Schultz, this is a clear sign that gold was smuggled. But why? Despite the large gold reserves in Africa, many countries were caught off guard by the sudden spike in demand for gold over the last 2 decades. They didn't have the infrastructure, the equipment, or the laws in place to regulate gold mining on an industrial scale. That left a huge vacuum that was filled by artisanal and small-scale gold miners, or ASM. If you owned a piece of land that had gold on it, you could pay a private company to explore, mine, and transport that gold on your behalf. And of course, given what you're exporting is pretty valuable, that company probably needs to have its own form of security. And that's a polite way of saying a militia.
And when you have a very volatile situation or even an armed conflict like in Sudan, then of course you have these armed groups that seek to take control of the mines and enrich themselves by trading the yellow metal.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a stable government, then you would be able to extract your natural resources and be able to redistribute the capital that comes from the extraction process, be able to pay better for your workers that are engaging in the process of extraction. But of course, that would mean that this gold would be far more costly. And the profits for those who are basically fencing this gold would be far slimmer. Yeah, that doesn't even happen in stable African countries. I know, but I'm just saying.
And that's typically what we're observing at the moment in Sudan.
Sudan has been in a state of near constant war for decades, and its former leader, Omar al-Bashir, fueled the conflict by empowering both the military as well as regional mercenary groups to help him quash anti-government rebellions in places like Darfur, where the worst of the fighting was taking place. In 2011, the international community stepped in, splitting the country along ethnic and religious lines and forming South Sudan. The problem was 75% of Sudan's large oil reserves were in the south, and overnight the government lost its single biggest source of income. Now, Sudan always knew it had gold, but it had never really...
Also, they're hella tall. South Sudan, the youngest country on the planet, also happens to be the tallest country, I think, on the planet too.
They explored it before. It also had a big problem. After the war in Darfur, crippling US sanctions meant that Sudan couldn't just hire international mining companies to help it set up its industry. So instead, al-Bashir handed out subsidized contracts to anyone who had the means to mine that gold. And most of those contracts went to generals and rebel leaders who'd helped him fight in Darfur. With so many actors and little to no official regulation, what should have become Sudan's burgeoning gold industry instead became ripe with corruption. In 2017, reports started reaching the country's trade ministry that Khartoum airport and the port of Sudan were being used to smuggle out gold, mostly heading to the UAE. In one example, a 2-ton barrel of sand samples being loaded onto an Emirates airline flight was found to be largely made up of raw gold. In another instance, a sick woman was driven to the door of her flight in an ambulance, but the paramedic who was helping her get onto her flight was caught trying to sneak gold bars he'd hidden inside of an oxygen cylinder into her bag. In 2018, Sudan's trade minister Musa Karama sounded the alarm.
مطار الخرطوم أكبر منفذ للتهريب وأنه في عام 2015 طلعت منه 102 طن.
Never eating Dubai chocolate again? Yeah. Fun fact, that's also, I believe, people are going to yell at me for saying this, but a Turkish invention. They just sell it as Dubai chocolate because nobody would fucking buy it if you sold it as Turkish chocolate. I'm serious. No, I think it's literally because there was like Turkey has a fuck ton of pistachios. And that's like the primary unique ingredient in that's the primary unique ingredient in Dubai chocolate is the pistachio paste it has on the kunafa. Also, for the record, that's not even a new phenomenon. Look at fucking Greek yogurt, brother. Like, it's not new for Turkey to literally sell something that they invented under a different regional actor's name.
من مطار الخرطوم ومطار دبي في الوقت اللي بتقول حكومة السودان انه انتاجها كله في هذا العام كان 70 طن فقط. لو ال 100 طن دي كلها جات لبنك السودان يعني الطن بحوالي 46 مليون دولار. يعني نتكلم عن 4 مليار ونص. ده أكثر من 50% من إجمالي وارداتنا يعني. دي براهن.
One of the biggest untapped mines in the country was Jebel Amr in North Darfur. It quickly fell into the hands of Hamitti, or Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, the leader of the Rapid Support Forces. The RSF was a paramilitary group that grew out of the Janjaweed militia, whose leaders had been charged by the International Criminal Court with committing dozens of war crimes in Darfur. Hamitti set up a private firm to oversee the gold production, Al Junaid Company, and left his brother in charge of it. The revenue from the gold would allow the RSF to expand, buy weapons, and make Hamitti one of the richest and most powerful men in Sudan.
The RSF is rich. They have business interests and business holdings that will, Hamitti bailed out the National Bank. It is one rich family and they have their fingers in everything. And all their businesses are based in the UAE.
During his rise to power, Hamiti began fostering
I apologize. It was invented in Dubai. It's just produced in Turkey. And in January 2025, a German court in Cologne decided that Aldi has to stop selling his product named Ali in Dubai handmade chocolate on the ground that it might mislead consumers that the chocolate has been produced in Dubai. Well, it's actually produced in Turkey. But no, it's invented by it was invented by Sarah Hamouda, a British Egyptian engineer living in Dubai at the time. Hamouda was pregnant, and through her food craving, she came in to imagine a combination of chocolate, pistachio, tahini, and kunefe, a Middle Eastern dessert made of kadif syrup and soft cheese. At home, Hamouda worked on developing a bar before contacting Noel Katis Omamalen, a Filipino culinary consultant who had trained as a pastry chef. In his account of Dubai Chocolate's creation, Omamalen said the pair wanted to create a chocolate bar with the flavor of a dessert. His favorite Arabic dessert was kunefe, and because he thought it would have an appealing crunch and nostalgic value, Omamalen suggested a chocolate bar using his flavors. Together, they developed the chocolate, forming a partnership in the online shop Fixed Dessert Chocolatier, which in 2022 launched Can't Get Kunefe of It. Can't Get Kunefe contained pistachio, tahini, and kadayif, and was covered in yellow and green patterns. Bars are made by hand, and the interior is piped. The team working 6 to 8 hours produced 25 bars a day. It's actually fucking delicious. I'm not gonna lie. I have had it. Only the Turkish one, though. Don't worry. And then it exploded in popularity over TikTok.
Close ties to the UAE, where most of its financial operations were based, as well as Russia, which had long been Sudan's main military supplier. Russia was gearing up for an invasion of Ukraine and had begun stockpiling gold to finance its war effort. Its Wagner mercenary group had been active in Sudan since 2014, helping secure mining operations and facilitating the smuggling of gold out of the country. When Omar al-Bashir was toppled by a popular uprising in 2019, that relationship continued to flourish. Just days after the start of the Ukraine invasion, a Russian cargo plane carrying boxes of cookies was inspected by Khartoum airport officials. Turns out they weren't cookies. It was actually a ton of pure gold. The flight was one of 16 that year, likely facilitated by Sudan's army and likely heading to a Russian military base in Syria. Sudan's transitional government, now headed by the army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Hamiti as its deputy, attempted to consolidate the gold sector. In 2020, it nationalized the lucrative Jebel Amr mine and bought it from Hamiti's brother for $200 million, offering him an additional 33% of shares in Sudamin, the company set up to oversee gold mining. Not just that, but the RSF was assigned to secure the mine's operations, and this was a sign of what was to come. Despite promising to withdraw and allow the democratic process to take place, the Sudanese armed forces overthrew the transitional government and seized control in 2021. But quickly, with protests outraged by the coup taking over the country, the army struggled to control it. So they turned to Hamiti for help.
The army couldn't hold on to security, so they invited the RSF into the capital to secure it for them, because they never thought the RSF would turn on them. Because of those miscalculations, we were at that point where Hamiti actually believed that he could wage war and he could win this war.
Remember Wagner? Now, they had helped train RSF forces and actually recruited them to fight in another civil war in Libya a year earlier. Russia and the UAE, who were both deeply involved in Libya, were impressed by the RSF's fighting ability and began to see Hamiti as the man they believed could rule Sudan, and the man who could secure the gold. 5 months earlier, the UAE had inked a deal to build Sudan a $6 billion port that would act as a special economic zone between the two countries, so it was very invested. The same year, the UAE imported 39 tons of gold directly from Sudan, valued at around $2 billion. But UN data suggests that another 20 tons of gold was smuggled from Sudan through Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, and South Sudan. By the time war broke out again in April the following year, reports suggest that nearly all the gold that left Sudan's borders was flowing straight to Dubai. This picture was taken in March 2023. It shows Hamiti shaking hands with Emirati ruler Mohammed bin Zayed during a long trip that he took to Abu Dhabi. During that trip, he also met with the other man in the photo.
Could be for any reason.
Deputy Prime Minister Sheikh Mansour. to discuss efforts to resolve the Sudanese crisis. But as soon as Hamiti returned from that trip, he put his plan into action. On April 15, RSF forces entered Khartoum and attempted to take control. An all-out war was declared against the Sudanese armed forces, and Hamiti made crystal clear his ambitions to take over. The war devastated Sudan, killing over 15,000 civilians and leaving more than 10 million displaced. The United Nations has called the situation a humanitarian nightmare. With 26 million people, that's half of all Sudanese at risk of acute hunger. This in a country that's still exporting billions of dollars worth of gold every year.
We were dragged into this war. We had warned about it as activists, as members of civic society. We had warned about this. That's why we were always chanting, to the RSF needs to be dissolved, the army needs to be, pushed back from politics and so on. But we weren't listened to. We were cast aside, and we're the ones who are now paying the price. It's not the politicians, it's not the army generals, it's not the militia, it's us, For many of us, we've lost everything. And we can't even start from scratch because we're not being allowed to start from scratch. So it's just this sense of, where do we go from here? What do we do now? And it was also that sense that no one actually cares. It's very disconcerting in a bit, as in, because I see people, for example, talking about Gaza the whole time. I'm all for it. But when you talk about Congo or Sudan or something else, they're like, oh, but it's between, it's between your own people. But they don't seem to understand that it's not between our two people. It's a proxy. We're being used as a proxy for other countries, and these other countries wield way too much power.
As the fighting in Sudan went on month after month, people started asking, where's Hamiti getting all these weapons? All of these tanks and drones? Well, officials in Libya told us that the RSF allegedly have been armed on the Emiratis' behalf through Libyan proxies. The military shipments would be flown from Libyan airports to the Central African Republic, then driven overland into Darfur. Wagner Group, which has been working with the CAR's embattled government, had transported advanced weapons across the border into Sudan, including missiles and anti-aircraft systems. The same thing was happening in Chad, where cargo flights from the UAE have been landing on a daily basis in a remote border town, supplying powerful weapons and drones, treating injured RSF fighters, and airlifting some of them to military hospitals in Abu Dhabi. In Uganda, the leadership holds strong ties with Hamiti's family and the UAE. In August 2023, this video...
I don't know how recent this video is, but isn't Wagner kind of neutered now? Wagner restructured under a different name. They don't have the same level of power that they used to, but they still operate as a PMC, a private military contractor. It's I think it's called Africa Corps or something. It's still the same shit though. It's still
was captured of a private plane belonging to a Ugandan company landing in Sudan's North Kordofan state. According to local sources, the plane had arrived from the UAE and was carrying Russian-made artillery rockets. Last November, Sudan's army generals called out the Emirates directly.
أما دولة الإمارات أنا ما قادر أنا أعرف منظمة إرهابية أعرف منظمة مافيا منظمة إجرامية لكن دولة مافيا أول مرة نسمع بها.
The UAE has denied these allegations, saying it was only providing humanitarian support and that it has consistently called for de-escalation, a ceasefire, and the initiation of diplomatic dialogue. The RSF has also denied it's getting weapons from the UAE. They say that they have their own means of accessing and transporting arms. And while ceasefire talks start and stop without any progress, Hamiti has continued his diplomatic visits to African neighbors, painting himself as the man trying to save Sudan.
أخاطبكم اليوم وبلادنا تشهد المزيد من نزيف الدماء بسبب حرب 15 أبريل اللعينة. هذه الحرب التي أشعلها فلول النظام السابق وأجبرنا على خوضها مكرهين. ويشهد الله أننا سعينا بصدق لتلافيها وتجنب بلادنا وولاياتها حتى وقع الهجوم الغادر علينا الذي لم يترك لنا خيارا سوى القتال دفاعا عن أنفسنا. ومن هنا ندعو إلى تشكيل لجنة تحقيق دولية لمعرفة من أشعل هذه الحرب ومحاسبته على جميع إفرازاتها.
Meanwhile, people in Khartoum are sharing stories of RSF soldiers breaking into their houses with metal detectors, specifically designed to find gold. Last year, the US, UK, and several EU countries put sanctions on private companies belonging to the RSF and the Sudanese armed forces. They included the UAE-based gold mining company Al Junaid, run by Hamiti's brother, who was also placed under sanctions. Then in January 2025, the Biden administration extended those sanctions to Hamiti himself, accusing the RSF of committing genocide in Sudan. But despite efforts by Sudan's government to hold the UAE responsible, the International Court of Justice threw out their case in May because the UAE had opted out of a key article in the Genocide Convention, preventing them from being sued in the UN court.
It's a new form of land grab, of colonialism, call it what you want, but this is what's happening. And if you look at throughout the whole scale of Africa, from the Sahel to the Red Sea, that's what's been happening. You know, you don't wage wars because you can't afford to wage a war, but you will pay someone to wage that war for you. In return, you will have access to things that in your own country you do not have. I mean,
when will Israel use what's going on in Sudan to deflect from their crimes, try to further demonize Muslims? Seems like a hostile talking point. What do you mean? They already do it. They literally do it all the time. They will always say, what about Sudan? You don't care about Sudan. What about Sudan? They say it all the time. And Israel defenders do it all the time as well. All the way down to all the way down to Cory Booker. You do know that the Greek yogurt Turkish is only due to the Turks doing genocide against the Greeks. Yes, it's from Turkey, but the Greeks started it in Turkey. Okay, man. I mean, my family is Turkish from Greece, so.
Be blunt, the UAE does not have one single gold mine in their country. Yet they're the biggest dealers, wheelers and dealers.
Yogurt. That's the word. Yogurt. Like, goddamn, bro. Let the fucking Turks have something, you know? It's Turkic in origin. Nomadic motherfuckers who started doing it with the horse milk initially, okay? Does this sound Greek at all to you? Yogurt.
In gold in the world right now. How can that be? It just, 1 + 1, the numbers don't lie, the evidence is.
Show us proof of Kaya. We don't see her. You mean proof of life of Kaya? She's currently on a fucking long ass walk. Pro-Israel crowd also lavishes praise on the UAE because they normalize relations with Israel and the Abraham Accords, all while UAE's primary funder of the RSF paramilitary. Yeah. The one who care about Africa as much as Gaza line is a cynical ADL talking point meant to heavily imply anti-Semitism through the messy work of having to show it. Booker is soullessly reciting a script. None of it makes sense or speaks to any of the underlying universalism. The highbrow version of this is Anne Applebaum suddenly deciding in 2025 to care about Sudan after never writing about it before and front-loading her very serious report on it in The Atlantic with finger-wagging about how Gaza protesters don't ever talk about it, which many Gaza protesters do talk about it, by the way. They talk about Congo, they talk about Sudan, they do. It just doesn't matter. Like, it doesn't matter that they do. Just like it doesn't matter that I did as well. The extent of my coverage on Sudan, of course, due to my limited knowledge over it beyond, UAE involvement, is not because it's a less important issue, as I've said before, but more so because it's not directly involved with the United States of America. It's an indirect involvement that America has, as it has its fingers in every fucking pie, obviously. And this is no different.
There, and that's what's happening right now.
And you might be thinking, how can so much illegal gold flow into Dubai without anyone noticing? Well, that's because of a peculiar loophole in the way the gold market is regulated.
Once gold is imported into Dubai, it will be melted and refined, and through this process, gold will officially acquire a new origin. Its new origin will then be Dubai. even though it has been extracted from a mine in Sudan or perhaps in Mali or in Burkina Faso.
And while the UAE has introduced new rules on gold sourcing in 2023, experts say these are only cosmetic.
We already know from interviews that we've done with actors in the United Arab Emirates that the regulation has not been taken seriously.
Without a serious way to figure out where it's coming from, how it's obtained, and who's really selling it, the City of Gold has indeed become a global hub for gold laundering. And as the demand for gold and other precious metals continues to rise, the most powerful actors in the world are now engaged in a new scramble for Africa. A scramble that continues in peace and war, whatever the cost. Thank you for watching this episode of
The UAE is supplying the RSF from multiple bases around Africa. In the region in the west, there's Libya and Chad, and in the east, they have bases in Somalia's Puntland and Yemen's Socotra archipelago. They've been developing these networks for years. The UAE and RSF first became allies in 2018 during Yemen's civil war. The only real form of civil government left after the seizing of power and then after the war starting is resistance committees, which are just local councils trying to meet people's needs.